Welcome to the Library of Virginia. I'm Catherine Fitzgerald Wyatt, and I'm very pleased to welcome Charles H. Ford, who will be discussing the new work he co-edited with Jeffrey Littlejohn, Queer Virginia, New Stories in the Old Dominion. The book offers a long-needed record of the courageous and creative ways that LGBTQ people across the Commonwealth have persevered and fought for their rights. The book is available for purchase in the Virginia shop, and a signing will follow the program. It'll be out in the lobby, so please get a copy if you don't already have one. Charles Howard Ford, PhD, is a tenured full professor of history at Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia. He has been at Norfolk State since 1992 and won its highest award for excellence in teaching, research, and service in 2014. Accordingly, he is a published expert on the local histories of 20th century Virginia and Texas, having co-written 4 books and over 12 articles with his research partner, Jeffrey L. Littlejohn of Sam Houston State University. Their elusive equality, desegregation, and resegregation in Norfolk's public schools, UVA Press, 2012, changed the port city's official story by including African American voices and sources. Their research has won several awards in both Virginia and Texas. In terms of local LGBTQ history, Ford and Littlejohn published the popular picture book, LGBT Hampton Roads, in 2015, and Ford went on to produce 2 films on local queer history, one on Norfolk's Ghent and the other on the city of Hampton, both of which are featured at HR Pride's website. Ford and Littlejohn have also co-authored a collection published by the University of Virginia Press in the spring of 2025, Queer Virginia, New Voices from the Old Dominion. But now I'd like to turn it over to Charles Ford. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming today. I'm very pleased to finally have this project done. It took quite a while. I'll be talking about the making of the project today, as well as some of the content involved. I don't want to give away the stories, but I do want to give you a taste of the research and some of the conclusions that myself and my contributors and my co-editor, Dr. Littlejohn, came up with. Just to give you sort of a sense of how it came about, right? Because again, it took a long time. Again, my research was primarily, my publishing is primarily in the struggles to gain African American civil rights in Virginia and Texas. As you heard in my biography, my very generous biography, Dr. Littlejohn and I published Elusive Equality, a look at Norfolk's public schools from the 1930s to the present day, from University of Virginia Press. That was in 2012. We've looked at Booker T. Washington High School and the struggles to change it and make it, renovate it, right, over the 20th century. And also the law firm of Joe Jordan, Ed Dolly, and Len Holtz, which was a law firm centered in Norfolk and did all kinds of cases all over the nation. So that's where usually I'm publishing, but you know, I've had this partnership with Dr. Littlejohn since the Brown decision, the commemoration of the Brown decision in 2004, where my research went primarily into Virginia history. So a long-standing collaboration with Dr. Littlejohn, looking at civil rights in Virginia and Texas. And then I got interested in queer history. I'm an openly gay man, but I was interested in queer history about 2012 when I was asked by Equality Virginia to do a series of placards to decorate a ballroom in Norfolk, the ballroom of now Wyndham in Norfolk, with a timeline from beginning to end of all these people, places, things that were important in queer history. And that timeline became the genesis of the picture book, LGBT Hampton Roads, in 2015. So out of community service, which is usually frowned upon in the academy, Actually, it was an activist. It was an impetus for me to go in a different direction. I've served on all kinds of boards and everything else. And again, out of the board service came the connections to do the civil rights history, but also to do the various other histories that I'm involved in. So being an advocate and also a scholar and a teacher and a trustee, they're all connected together. So it's not one or the other, right? So I would encourage those scholars in here to do more community service, to do more advocacy. Let me take care of this. And to do more stuff in the community, because it does actually lead to research and scholarship, and they all help each other. What I'm trying to say. So not a detour at all. Also, along with my research for Equality Virginia, I've done a lot of research for Hampton Roads Pride, and was a board member there from 2017 to 2024. Even before I was a board member, I did Pride Fest, the tent, with the placards from the Equality Virginia, but adding that to them. We renovated them in 2023, gave them a little updated look. They look great. Again, if you want any kind of exhibition, Virginia-wide or anything else, for the museum, these are museum quality artifacts and all kinds of other things. I mean, it's like a moving museum every June in Norfolk down at Town Point Park. It's called the History Experience for Hampton Roads Pride. And so also out of that comes a walking tour, of course, right? Which I sort of based mine off of the one I did at Washington Pride many years before. This is a downtown map that I was going to give on Saturday, this Saturday. I know you had Richmond Pride here, but in Norfolk, it also rained. And so this is rescheduled for October 18th. So if you're in town, October 18th at 2 o'clock. And this city tour, by the way, will be the focus of my next film, which I hope to get a grant from Virginia Humanities. The two other films we did on a shoestring budget of $2,500, largely donated from the videography company TOC Creative. So it's not me with a cell phone, right? It's actually drones and all kinds of other wonderful camera work, very professional, and it's at the Hampton Roads Pride website. And in Queer Virginia, you notice there's like an appendix of all kinds of resources that you can use or look at from your own place. That also includes a reference to these films, so like the actual web address for you. And of course, the series is called Red Lights and Civil Rights, which I think is kind of interesting. That was given to it by the Urban Planning Society, the Professional Society of Urban Planners, for whom I did this tour in 2015. So that's where that came from, not from me. But it's actually quite apt in that sense. So this has been quite a journey in all kinds of different directions. This particular collection, though, came at a meeting of the, I guess, at the Virginia Department of Historical Preservation in either 2017 or 2018, I can't remember, but around the time period. Involved all kinds of people leading in history, both amateurs and also local historians, professional historians, academic historians, all kinds of historians, right? We're all historians. Beth Marshak was there. We also had Samantha Rosenthal from then Roanoke College. We had all kinds of big names, I thought, there. And we were talking about the necessity to have some kind of collection, some kind of written, published, peer-reviewed collection to document all these stories, because we had a lot of popular histories, right, that did reach the community, but we wanted to have something that would reach both the community and academia to give credibility to the field, because there's so little that's secondary that's published in here, and there's so many stories that still haven't been told, right? Especially that are maybe encased in this library, right, that need to be told. So we had that idea that we should do it. And of course, there was a follow-up meeting at Old Dominion, and then we were joined by Kathleen Rhodes, who's a scholar in women's studies and queer studies. She has her own class there. I don't have my own class in that subject, but she does in Norfolk, and she has her own history tours and own oral history project that's quite extensive, particularly about the first women in the military, the Navy particularly, also about bar owners and advocates of the 20th century. They're still there, right? She's done a lot of oral histories that are preserved for future scholars, and present scholars too, that are there for you at the Old Dominion Archives. So the formal call for papers came out in 2019, right before the pandemic. As you can imagine, the pandemic delayed the selection, the writing, the editing, everything else. Papers were selected by 2021, and then we tried to get board approval at the press, and they thought, well, it's good, but they wanted something more. They wanted more about Charlottesville, of course, right? A focus on Charlottesville. You can't have Queer Virginia without Charlottesville, right? So that was added, and then everyone loved it, right? And it was edited, refined. A lot of the historiography I didn't know, so I had to really learn that. And once I did, I think I really did a great job on it, the introduction, in placing this collection in all kinds of historiographies, the history of history, how it came about, or at least the thought processes. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but again, it took a long time. So from 2017 to 2025. Now, most academic works in history, that's probably average these days. And with my heavy teaching load at Norfolk State and all my community things, again, I think I did a pretty good job in trying to get this out. But it did take a lot of perseverance and determination. So, I congratulate my contributors as well, and also my wonderful person at Mark Monet's, right, at the press, to put this on the Ravenna nameplate, which is a new nameplate at the University of Virginia for popular, and popular sort of academic, sort of transitioning between the two kinds of histories. And that, of course, has improved our sales, I'm sure. This is much better than anything I've done in terms of that. Let's see. So the table of contents, there are 6 or 7 articles. We have like a note on terminology and sort of a note explaining why we use the word queer instead of LGBTQ+, at least for the title. We use them both interchangeably almost, but how queer came about and sort of the etymology, academic and popular, which don't always match, as you know. So there's an explanation there because it's for a popular audience, and maybe a general reader might be put off by the word queer. I know in the early 20-teens, when we tried to raise money for the Gay Studies Endowment, we used that word kind of as an umbrella word, which was kind of outdated even then, right? Because queer as an umbrella word would have turned off some of our donors. I think that's not the case now. I think we've gone past that. But still, there's that note for terminology for those readers who might not be attuned to that, right? We also have the historiography. And that, again, took a lot of time for me to learn, to place these primary source, pointillist, right, very detailed local history in somewhat of a national narrative or something, what's happening nationally with queer history or nationally with American history or in general with Virginia history, right? So this collection certainly is in the tradition of for the last generation of Southern voices being finally discovered or in places, unusual places you wouldn't expect to find queer history or culture, such as in rural Mississippi or Arkansas. Arkansas has a collection too. of books, or at least articles, scholarly articles. Also, the idea of looking at African American history, and including African American history and queer history, the intersectionality of all these histories, right? Again, being mindful of that fact, being mindful of the fact of including transgender in the LGBT pantheon, right? Types of identities. So these are very recent trends, and so it's very well within those kinds of trends. Also in Virginia history, there's an idea that it ends at Civil War, right? We go into the 20th century mainly, but the whole 20th century, not just liberation, looking at before and after Stonewall, and the effects of more national metropolitan trends on Virginia, on even rural Virginia. And also looking at certain things that are, big name, marquee events in the 20th century, like New Deal or urban renewal or obscenity, right? The definition of obscenity, what's obscene or not, or the cultural respectability, which, as you'll find in the collection, is a double-edged sword, helping to gain legal rights, but also being used against aspects of our community that are deemed not respectable and worthy of removal, right? Be it by either parking lots or parks or something else that would be much more bucolic, right? At least to the people in charge. So that we go into that as well. Certainly with the Hershee Bar in Norfolk, which was deemed not respectable, even though it was the oldest lesbian space in the cities in that area, in that region, right? It was not considered historical enough, right? And there's still not a historical marker there. There's just this terrible park, attempted a park without any parking, right? So it's kind of sad in that sense. And Kathleen Rhodes goes into that in her article. I'm just going to read the titles. I want to get the titles right, so I'm going to read from the book itself. The first one is a legal study of how deep the legal oppression was in Virginia for LGBT people. It's particularly entrenched and nuanced and very, very controlling, especially then in the 20th century through the Alcohol Control Board in terms of regulating space and person, right? From sodomy laws to same-sex marriage, to discrimination and LGBT activism in Virginia. And one of the strategies to cut away from this oppression, which was so entrenched, was to embrace the culture of respectability and to put forth plaintiffs that were not from a side circus or the very respectable, connected Episcopalian people put forth that no dirt on them at all, right? And they seemed very respectable. And that got rid of this formidable legal facade in less than 20 years, right? I mean, it's remarkable how that happened. The second one is on an African-American, transgender African-American woman in the 1930s. Beyond the red-wigged boy-girl, perceptions of a black transgender woman in Northern Virginia before queer liberation by Amy Bursch, a librarian at the Arlington Public Library. This is an extraordinary look at a transgender woman in the 1930s working at the New Deal agency, the Rural Electrification Agency, working in rural Loudoun County, but before that becoming a newspaper phenomenon in 1932 as a witness to a murder case, in a murder case that was a civil rights case that starred Charles Hamilton Houston, the mentor of Thurgood Marshall. And despite having all these star witnesses and star attorneys there, Hannah Nokes, the person in question here, was the star of the newspaper featured both in positive and negative ways, as you can imagine, And it's just a fascinating look at coverage of queer people in the 1930s. Some of it could be actually positive, depending on the perspective of the person, obviously, but also very, very just in terms of androgyny or transgender, just very, very off-putting, to say the least. The most horrible coverage was actually for the most radical African-American newspaper, The Planet. The Journal and Guide, a more conservative African-American newspaper in Norfolk, was far more generous and far more fair and balanced in its terms of its coverage of that particular case. From Samantha Rosenthal, we have Exit 5. This is Article 3. Exit 5, Museum of Transsex Work and the Making of Roanoke, Virginia. And this is an excellent look at Roanoke, after post-World War II to the 1990s, looking at urban removal, largely, and the reactions of the various peoples, various stakeholders to that neighborhood in Roanoke, Virginia. We also have, for Richmond, Mapping Queer Richmond, Space, Place, Community Building Around Diversity Richmond, which also talks about gentrification and queer space and the politics of respectability here in Richmond. Jay has looked at a lot of oral sources, a lot of quotes, very rich in quotes in that particular work. Jay is also the author of a look at the Panhandle of Florida and queer history there, so it's kind of interesting, and works at William & Mary. Charlottesville's queer history across 30 years, right, from Celine Means, and again, this was a previously published article, had been, but it was spruced up and revised and made relevant and modern for our time, modern meaning, 10 years ago, right? And so brought up to date. And then also we have that article I talked about earlier from Kathleen Rhodes. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right? The Struggle to Save Virginia's Oldest Lesbian Bar from Kathleen Rhodes. And then the last one, Queer Liberation and the Obscenity Debate in Hampton Roads. That one actually began as a Virginia Forum paper, if you remember, at Norfolk State in, I guess, 2017. That's the first time an HBCU had hosted the Virginia Forum. And I think it's the first time that there was ever a queer history panel or proposal to that august body, right, that meets every year in the spring. But also bits and pieces of that came from papers I did on the libraries in 2018 and on the Taxi Zoom Clo controversy at the Narrow Theater in 2019. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, just give you a taste of it, because I want you to read the book. So let's see. So in other words, this article, number 7, was 3 different articles, 3 different papers put together to make one article. I'm more of a social historian. Dr. Littlejohn's more of a legal historian, so we make a good collaboration there. That's why the first one's more him, legal history. I'm more social history, oral history, everyday people history. So the balance, you can see that in the collection. So the first stop in Article 7, right, all about the obscenity laws, was this wonderful space, the Q Club. I don't know if you've ever been there, anyone? The Q Club, which was by Old Dominion College in the 1970s. This is, of course, the 1970s, because you can tell by the Dodge Dart or Valiant, or Plymouth Valiant there, and some of the other cars, the Torino, right? Grand Torino. This was right on Colley Avenue and 46th Street. Colley Avenue is one of the main thoroughfares in Norfolk. It's far away from downtown, though, up here. This will be in its own neighborhood now called Colleywood, but then part of the neighborhoods around Old Dominion. The Q Club was started by Tony Pritchard. Tony Pritchard became sort of the very famous maker of bars in Norfolk from that first effort in 1971. He wanted to make the boiler room, the garage, all kinds of other probably bars that you probably know about. The in-between, right? It was in between Norfolk and Virginia Beach at the turn of the century. This one was the aspect of obscenity raids in 1971, 2, and 3. If you publicly declared that you were gay or lesbian, just said you were gay or lesbian, you would be arrested for obscenity, right? So it didn't include any kind of sexual behavior, or kissing or dancing or anything. You just said that you were gay or mentioned the word gay or lesbian, you were breaking Norfolk's community standards. And in fact, in the pilot, the Virginian Pilot, which is the leading newspaper of that area, of our area, October 29th, 1972, there's a whole guide by a very sympathetic reporter of how to avoid getting caught at the Q Club, which also had to deal with obscenity, harassment over their reenactment of Boys in the Band. And that was considered obscene. Of course, it doesn't include any kind of sexual or even romantic allusions that we would consider obscene. But of course, that was the community standard of that time, just that extreme, as you can imagine. So I go into just the nuances of being obscene by inherently, right? And what that meant to people at that time. In the 1970s, there was a newsletter called Friends, which came out of a sailor bar called Mickey's, which was further downtown. And that they also gave all kinds of prescriptions to people to avoid being caught by police, undercover police, by not saying, by skirting the idea that you're gay or lesbian, but you could be that but not say it, because the G word, the L word, was just so stigmatizing and also criminal, at least in Norfolk for that time. So that was real eye-opening to me, a real. Now here's a picture of Tony and his sister Shirley. Shirley had Shirley's Bar, which was now, it's now part of the Eastern Virginia Medical School parking lot, parking garage, right? But in the 1970s into the 1980s, it was again sort of the equivalent of the Q Club, but just further out and further away from downtown. Also on Colley Avenue, but further south towards the Atlantic City neighborhood. And again, visible, very liberating, very, and of course Shirley and they would also form all kinds of other bars too, Charlotte's Web and other, they'd be involved with all kinds of other activities, other queer spaces. So these two, a dynamic duo. Tony's still alive, Shirley had passed recently. So you have, again, on the sort of the rough side, right, the bar side, right, you saw that. Well, here's the respectable sort of impetus of advocacy and struggle in Norfolk. It would be the Unitarian Church, which moved to this location. It had been further downtown, but it moved to this location right by the Chrysler Museum. A very pretty place, but also prone to flooding. So that's why they moved in 2018 to a much safer place in Virginia Beach, actually. But at this place, you'd have the founding of our own community press. You'd have all kinds of other religious organizations sort of coming out of the Unitarian sort of umbrella, which would be Dignity and Integrity. Dignity, again, Catholic. Integrity, the Episcopalian. They sort of met here because they couldn't, in their churches, at least at first, do that. You'd also have the MCC coming out of this place too, right? So you had all kinds of religious, churchy directions that you wouldn't find today, really, behind advocacy. It really had a religious, at least in Norfolk, impetus in terms of advocacy. And it was this place that, again, would directly challenge the idea of being obscenity and using the words gay and lesbian on their signs as they marched against Anita Bryant. They were very, very big on pushing the envelope, and eventually the police just didn't do that, right? They didn't bother with the words as they did earlier in the decade, thanks largely to places like the Unitarian Church, very powerful builder of community and advocacy in Norfolk. And of course, the Our Own Press, right, began as a newsletter of the Unitarian Gay and Lesbian Caucus. At a spaghetti dinner, it would close in 1998, right, ultimately end, and really provide a record, day-by-day record, and I would use it. It's digitized at Old Dominion. They have everything there, so you can just put in a keyword and it comes up, the full article. Very, very useful. Leonard Matlavick would be one of the people also at this church, right? Although he would be at Langley Air Force, the first person to declare in the military that he was openly homosexual, and of course, remember the Time magazine cover of September 1975. So all that energy, right, and activity really blew away the idea that just saying you're gay you could end in jail, right? And just these kinds of just being open in and out. Right now, that was the very famous cover you've probably seen before. It's also featured in my Hampton film, of course. And before I want to talk about also, the number 7 goes into the controversy over just the copies of Our Own that were given away free at public libraries and college libraries. And the libraries really had a problem with this, or at least it was brought to their attention that they didn't want to have free papers outside, say in like a bin, whatever, for the people to just pick up. Oh my God, they just couldn't have that, right? They just couldn't do it because people were just complaining. The library boards were being just distracted by just people complaining about these free newspapers. So Norfolk said, no, we're not doing it. Norfolk State, my university, said, no, we can't have that at the library. Thomas Nelson Community College, now Peninsula Community College, no, right? Virginia Beach had this very strange compromise. I go into it saying, well, we know this is obscene, but we also know there's a public interest. So we're going to have librarians watch people as they read the one copy we're going to have at the front desk. And you can imagine that was unworkable. It's kind of interesting also the politicians involved. In 1980, they're all for this kind of convoluted harassment, right? But Myra Obendorf would become one of the community's best friends by 2000. She was on the library board and she was opposed to Our Own even being allowed. So people do change. Well, maybe they're forced to change because she was a politician and voters would take notice by turn of the century. That would be a constituency she would have to appeal to as a Democrat. Then also, finally, a part of chapter, or number 7, Article 7, the one on obscenity, is about this controversy in Norfolk, and it also happened in Richmond too, over the screening of Taxi Zoom Clo, which literally means, what that's translated as? Taxi to the toilet. So Taxi to the Toilet was a coming out film about a teacher going through coming out. It was very poignant, a little maybe turgid for our taste of this time in terms of its cinematography, a little maybe amateur, but it did win a lot of awards at that time, right? 1981. It's about an hour and 15 minutes, and 15 minutes of it is a golden shower scene. So you can imagine that brought the attention of municipal authorities, who apparently were in the audience. Why would they be there? But okay. They were in the audience checking this out. It was shown once in October of 1982 in Norfolk at the Narrow Cinema. If you know anything about the Narrow, it has all kinds of edgy art films. Especially at that time, it would show all kinds of films that would not be shown at a Cineplex, right? So this seemed to be, oh, just another art film, right? Whatever. But oh no, that the reel was rented from Promovision and was taken home by one of the owners. Well, the police go to the owner's home and demand, and they actually seize the reel from the owners, right? Okay. Then they demanded that city wanted an apology from the Narrow for showing such a pornographic film, right? Such a terrible film, and which they got, right? Because the lawyer was Peter Decker, who actually defended a lot of gay men caught in parks or cruising or whatever, right? This one he said that there's no way with the golden showers, there's no way that that you're going to get out of this one. Just issue the apology and settle it. So he settled it, right? Well, okay, they settled it, but the reel is still in the city's possession, right? So it took almost all these court cases, all these appeals courts, almost went to the Supreme Court in terms of trying to get that reel back from the city. They eventually did, right? This will be the last X-rated film shown at the Narrow, but I think it showed, it was part of the breaking down of, and I showed in the article, the breaking down of the community standard rule that had defined obscenity, and Dr. Littlejohn goes into the legal history of how these cases in Norfolk broke down that rule, the community standard by which obscenity was defined very, subjectively by who was ever in charge of the municipality, right? It was also in Richmond too. The ACLU was involved. VCU clubs were involved. Initially, the administration of VCU didn't want to show it. I think they did show up at off campus. I don't know the exact details. I can't remember them right now, but there was a controversy in Richmond as well a year later in 1983. So this film, again, Taxi Zoom Clo, right, was an agent in dissolving that community standards, which had been, of course, applied against queer people much more stringently, right, than other much more salacious films of that time that were heterosexual in orientation and content. Let's see what else. And so all kinds of controversies. We just looked at a few obscenity or struggles in Norfolk. Of course, the Iowa explosion in 1989, which I think is the only one of these controversies that has a marker, historical marker in Norfolk. Of course, there's no allusion to the queer dimensions or the queer accusations in the case, what was going on. The Iowa was a battleship where they had an explosion and it was blamed on a gay couple, or at least an alleged gay couple, but maybe not, right? Who knows what was going on there. And of course, the Sharon Bottoms custody case, which of course was not in Hampton Roads, but adjacent to Southside. And again, in some ways made the next generation of activists have a sort of person who was the plaintiff or defendant trying to get their rights, have them have a very clean and very connected background rather than being someone who is poor or marginal of any kind, right? That would be laughed at on a talk show, right? That was more the 90s style. To avoid that, they went to the more connected couples, right? that challenged the marriage law, the marriage referendum. So let's see what else we have here. This also was another controversy in Norfolk. It's not in the book. It was one of the cutting room floor things about obscenity. But Dignity, which was the Catholic group, was very, very strong in Norfolk at this church, Sacred Heart. And the people at Sacred Heart and Dignity knew Walter Sullivan, who was the bishop centered in Richmond, but he also was a Catholic bishop there. And so they all knew each other, and so Bishop Sullivan sort of winked at the Dignity eventually meeting at Sacred Heart, and also Integrity would also, the Episcopalian LGBT advocacy group. And again, it's part of the churchy kind of advocacy, right, that you find in Norfolk during the 1980s. But guess who found out about this? Pope John Paul II, right? And he did not like it. And he fired the pastor, priest there, basically told him to go out of the priesthood, and put a ban on Dignity or any kind of LGBT group meeting at this particular church or any church, a ban that still stands, right, today. And what was his justification? Well, it was obscene. This is obscene. This is terrible. This is against laws of man and God. People meeting, not having sex, meeting, right, like this, and listening to speakers and probably sharing recipes, right. Not particularly salacious things going on at Sacred Heart, right. So, and of course, this is part of my Ghent film too, part of the Ghent neighborhood, which in the 1970s was known as the gay ghetto of Norfolk. And it's probably less gay now than it was then, due to, of course, urban renewal and removal and gentrification. So, the two themes that run through the collection as well. So, but this was on the cutting room floor. I had to leave that out. So let's see what else I have. I think that's it for the collection. I hope you enjoyed this look. I couldn't give really justice to every contribution, but let me tell you, they're pretty good. They're varied. They're both popular and academic, both of them, right? Sort of a nice mix of each. And I'm just glad to see it's over and done, but also out there for people to read and react to and have your own stories, if you have them, right, come to life as well. So thank you. I'm open to questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have a favorite story of those seven?
Of those seven, I think the Hershee Bar is one of my favorites. Because I did live it, right? It's from 2018, the controversy over the city removing the Hershee Bar from existence. And Annette Stone, I know, Annette Stone, the owner, and so I was sort of part of that story, so that's kind of interesting to me. The most astonishing, though, is this idea of the Q Club just saying that you're gay or lesbian and having the police arrest you. I mean, that's just crazy.
Were charges pressed for those people?
Yes.
Who were arrested? And what happened?
Well, they were usually dropped when people fought back, or if they didn't fight back, they probably tried to settle it, or try to come with actual jail if they said that. However, if you were in the Navy and there were raids sort of in the evening, occasionally at the Continental, which is a former jazz club making a transition to gaming bar downtown, you could be held by the Navy on a rig as late as the 1990s, early 90s. Yeah.
Were these obscenity laws taken off the books? Or are they still
Well,
there?
unfortunately, they're still there, a lot of them, and so we can go back to them. So these court victories are very tenuous. As we were told last week, precedents aren't gospel.
Hello, I'm Beth Marshak, so I just wanted to reveal my identity. But I was around when this whole thing was sort of getting started, and I'm so glad to see what you were able to do with it. I know back when I was doing the work on my book, which was published in 2008, it was very hard to get people to agree to be in a book. And there were a number of areas that we could barely even touch on because of that. And of course, that has changed a lot, so that's very good. I might add that in any of those bar raids, in almost every case, the newspaper would print the names of the people. And so that was really where a major harm could come, because you could lose your job. There was no job protection. You could lose your place of residence. Particularly for women, you could lose custody of your children. So it was more than just being arrested, and I think people don't always quite get that. And I'm so glad to see what you were able to do with the Hershee Bar, which I think was a great space and had a lot of impact on people. When the Sharon Bottoms case was going on, Richmond Lesbian Feminists did fundraisers for Sharon in April. It was not to cover legal expenses. The ACLU did that. But because of their suddenly being very out, they both had job difficulties and things like that. So we did fundraisers here in Richmond at Babes and at Club Colors, but we also did them at the Hershee. And I just wanted to point out how community-minded they were there and what a wonderful space it was. And I would encourage people to tell your own stories, but also listen to gossip. And if you hear something interesting, try to follow up on it or pass it on to somebody else who might, because that is one of the ways that we figure out who might be, as you say, in the queer community, in the LGBTQ plus grouping, is through the grapevine, basically. There's not a good way, for the most part, you can't just go and research our community, because even where things have been written, they may not be indexed in a way that you can find them. So, yes, so the grapevine and gossip is a great source, and all of these archival places are interested in your materials. They're interested in your stories. Richmond City Library now has a project where you can go and do an oral history. You can take their equipment home free and do oral histories as well as copying things. So I really encourage everyone to realize that your story is also important.
And one story about the raids on bars in Hampton Roads. One was on Craig's, which was a restaurant on Virginia's oceanfront, which of course has always prided itself in a family-friendly area, primarily for a long time they banned cursing, you know that. But in 1964 and 5, this restaurant allowed same-sex dancing. Very brave. It was right like 21st Street, 22nd Street, right at the heart of the oceanfront. Right? So in March of 1965, it was raided, and all the names of the 86 people taken in were printed in the insert of the pilot called the Virginia Beach Sun, which is even more familiar than the paper. And a lot of those people were damaged forever, and some of them did suicide.
places to begin accumulating these